Hello and welcome to the first Manufacturing Technologies Association podcast. I'm Tom Lane, I look after PR and communications at the association, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Jeff Noon, our statistician, who's going to be running through our annual forecasts. Jeff, so following our recent forecast, how does the MTA see the UK economy?
Well, the UK economy's been growing at a fairly modest pace, but perhaps it could and really should have done a bit better. In 2016 and 2017 and into 2018, the Eurozone's been growing more rapidly than the UK, and that's quite unusual. So the UK went from being the fastest growing G7 economy between about 2012 and 2016, but it's now the slowest on a quarterly growth basis at least, and that really is what leads us to think we should have done a bit better than we have been doing. The last 18 months or so, 2 years maybe, the UK economy has been held back somewhat by high inflation, mainly due to the exchange rate fall which happened after the referendum, that increased input prices and really squeezed the consumer. Now the consumers are a major part of the UK economy, indeed it's a very major part of most developed economies, and therefore that's held back growth for the economy overall. Now most of our forecasts, all of our forecasts assume an orderly Brexit and then the transition period through to the end of 2020. And on that basis, we expect the UK economy to continue to grow, maybe pick up a little bit, but it's still going to be relatively modest by long-term standards.
So that's how the economy's going now, but what about our members' customers and what have they been doing?
Generally been pretty good, and to a large extent better, I guess, than the economy overall. Manufacturing's kind of struggled a little bit, but certainly some of the key industries that our members will supply to have been doing really well. So aerospace, for example, continues to be at a very high level, and no real sign of that falling away, although there's some slightly odd data coming out of the ONS. The last set of data they released included some revisions to the series, which now suggests there was a peak in about May 2017 with a sort of gentle slide at the high level from that. Now I'm not sure we necessarily share that view of the pattern of data for aerospace, but whether you believe it or not, it's still at a high level in historical terms, even if it maybe is a little bit off a recent peak level. Automotive industry is also at a high level, although we've seen a few negative headlines around that industry. It's important not to get too depressed by those. Yes, automotive is struggling a little bit, particularly the UK market, and so to the extent to which UK factories are supplying the UK market, then that's an issue. So output of actual cars themselves fell a little bit in 2017. It's probably going to fall again a little bit in 2018. That's mostly in the home market. Exports are broadly flat of vehicles themselves. But of course the UK makes more engines than it does cars, and arguably engines are more important for our members than cars themselves perhaps. A lot more machining involved. And so engine output is still growing. Okay, it's not growing perhaps quite as fast as it did in 2016, 2017, but it's still growing, although the balance is shifting. You're getting more for export. Yeah. Because if car production in the UK falls, then the number of engines you make for cars in the UK it's going to fall.
Logically.
But it's still doing pretty well, and overall the automotive industry's flat down a little bit, but not seriously so. Machinery industry, which is another important customer for our members, that benefited probably most from the competitiveness boost that UK manufacturers got when sterling fell. So we talked a bit earlier about how the sort of negative impact on inflation and the consumer, but it's certainly a boost for exporters. And we've seen a peak, sort of a bit of a spike in output that in my view at least, really reflects that competitiveness boost that came 12 to 18 months previously. Since then, the last 6 months or so, it's been falling again, output levels. But two things to say about that. Really, it's still at a high level. And secondly, in my opinion at least, it's really a correction of that spike rather than necessarily a harbinger of gloom as it may be.
Yeah.
And metal products, which is the fourth industry that we track, it's been broadly flat really since the recovery after the recession. It shared a little bit in the boom that we saw in machinery, but overall it's broadly flat and at a slightly disappointing level. So a bit of a mixed picture, but generally pretty good for our members' customers.
Well, and that brings us on to the Brexit-shaped hole in the room. So how does the Brexit impact the outlook then, Jeff?
Well, in a single word, completely.
Okay.
I mean, we're in a situation where, in essence, there are two possible outcomes. They're so diametrically opposite. We have an orderly Brexit with the transition deal and trade deals flowing from that and so on, or we have the no deal nightmare scenario that many people think. As I said earlier, all our forecasts are based on the assumption of an orderly Brexit and then the transition period. And on that basis, then we have some modest growth in manufacturing and for the engineering industries in 2019, and actually a small improvement in 2020. Now that's largely driven by what I'm calling a certainty bounce. Whatever Brexit turns out to be, knowing that, whether you like it or not, but at least knowing where it's going gives you the opportunity to plan and make business decisions. In the current situation, people just can't make a decision because we don't know how it's going to end up. I mean, the no deal scenario I suggested earlier, is a bit of a nightmare. Analysis by Oxford Economics, who do our forecast for us, suggests certainly a hit for the economy overall, maybe technically a recession, two negative quarters, but it'd be relatively short, relatively small dip for the economy as a whole, but for the manufacturing sector, a much bigger impact, probably a recession lasting 2 years, maybe not quite, but 6 or 7 quarters certainly. Again, just going back to the whole economy level, I mean, the UK obviously is hardest hit. Ireland takes a fair impact, and we know problems around the Irish border and so on are part of the deal. But apart from one or two countries like Poland and Czech Republic, which have quite high trade links with the UK, most of the rest of Europe sees only a small 0.2, 0.3 percentage points hit to their GDP. By the fourth quarter of 2020, which in theory is when the transition deal ends if we have a deal, but under a no-deal scenario, the estimate is that UK manufacturing output will be nearly 4% lower than it would have been had there been an orderly exit from Brexit. Now, these sorts of things are very difficult to actually ever prove whether it happened or not, but that's what the analysis suggests. So a much bigger impact on manufacturing than there is for the economy as a whole. And of the key customer industries that we talked about, they're generally above that average for manufacturing, because they're heavily export orientated, and that takes the biggest hit. So, for example, the food industry doesn't do too badly because it has a very low export ratio. Only about 10% of food made in the UK is exported, and may indeed benefit from import substitution anyway. So that doesn't do too badly under a no-deal scenario. But our part's big exposure to exports, and the other one, of course, is a big exposure to investment. They're all capital goods industries, and therefore, just as we're reliant on investment by those industries, they're very often reliant on investment in other places as well. And investment takes a particularly hard hit, mainly because of confidence. There's three things really that drive investment. There's have you got the money, have you got demand, and have you got the confidence to do that. And confidence kind of trumps the other two. So if you don't have the confidence, you might have plenty of cash in the bank, or interest rates might be really low. Yep. You might be facing a lot of short-term demand. But
if you've got uncertainty, how can you make that decision?
You're not going to make an investment decision if you can't see beyond maybe a 6 month to a year a window. Not much investment is going to be paid back in that period. Now, we had the announcement in the budget of an increase in the annual investment allowance, capital allowances, call it what you will. That will help, no doubt, simply because it alters that finance equation a little bit. But nonetheless, if people haven't got the confidence of what's going to happen in the Brexit scenario, however it plays out, it's not going to have much impact. So confidence is the key, and that's why investment is the hardest hit. So machinery industry that I talked about, that actually has the biggest impact of all the industries within manufacturing. That has the biggest impact from Brexit. One or two of the areas aren't too bad. Aerospace, for example, is hit, but it's a little bit below the average for manufacturing. But that's largely because it has a high level of what I call embedded investment. So, if you're making aircraft wings, or you're making aircraft engines, or you're making aircraft landing gears, three typically things that the UK does very well, you can't just pick that factory up and make it somewhere else. You can't just place an order. There won't be factories in France or Germany or wherever capable of making that equipment. So,
well, exactly. And when we've seen the Boeing factory open last week in Sheffield, so that's a little hint of confidence.
Yeah, I guess so. Although that investment decision was probably taken 4 or 5 years ago. And that's kind of the example. So an investment decision that might be taken in the next year or so, doesn't really come on stream. Wouldn't really come on stream for quite a long time. If you want to build a new aircraft wing factory, it'd probably take you best part, well, at least 5 years, I would have thought, to get that production up and running. Meantime, you still want to go on making them in the UK. So some industries won't do quite as badly as others for that reason. Automotive, ironically, doesn't do too badly, somewhere in the middle of all the other industries. But again, as supply chains adapt and change to whatever Brexit looks like, so that impact kind of builds in those industries. Whereas things like machinery, which is much more related to individual contracts, you might sell 2 or 3 machines, but you're selling against specific contracts rather than into supply chains. That reacts much more quickly than industries like automotive and aerospace will.
So, finally, to wrap it up, what's our surveys, the MTA surveys, telling us about the current situation? And before you get into that, maybe it's worth noting for any new listener, anyone who's not aware, what the importance of the MTA's monthly surveys actually do for the members.
Yeah, we have 2 main surveys that we run on a monthly basis. UK Market Survey is quite a detailed product look at mainly machine tools and cutting tools. They're the 2 areas that we have kind of very good coverage of, although there are other parts of the survey available. All our surveys, you have to be a member to take part, and you only get the reports if you take part. So there's parts of the survey that are available. People can fill in, but they're not necessarily interested in their own bit. They're interested in what's happening in machine tools or in cutting tools, for example. Yeah. And the other one is our business survey, which is designed to be a very quick overview. We try and turn the results around really quickly within the first couple of weeks of each month. Very quick overview of where manufacturing technology as a whole is, so we don't make any analysis of what parts of it you're in. It's meant to be a very quick overview. And we're looking at things then like confidence, and maybe link this into then answering the original question. So confidence over that survey, we've seen that level off over the last 3 or 4 months. But that period follows a period of a year or more when we've had the large double-digit percentage balances. So the percentage balance is the percentage of respondents who say things are going to be up, minus the percentage that are going to say things that are going to be down. Obviously, there's the same option in the middle. So we've had a long period of double-digit positive balances, and not just double-digit, very often 20% or more. So we've had a long period when confidence has sort of grown month on month. So a levelling off is not a disaster. In my view, it's probably inevitable at some point. You can't keep on getting more and more confident over time. There's got to come a period. And, the last 2 or 3 months, the news on Brexit hasn't been great in the papers. We saw it to some extent in the CBI survey that came out last week. Similar impact, all this bad news or lack of certainty in the newspapers has got to feed through into confidence. But it's not collapsed. So, we're not talking about a disaster scenario. We're not talking about a major collapse in activity. Similarly, in the inquiry level questions that we ask, inevitably there was a large positive balance in April and May around Mac. People come to the exhibition and inquiry levels go up. It's not rocket science. And since then, there's been a small slide. Part of that's simply a correction of what we saw in April and May. But again, it's flat. it's all more negative, but it's not a disaster. It's not collapsing. It's not pointing to the end of the world coming, as it were.
There's no apocalypse scenario yet.
Yeah, it's important not to overdo the negative. I mean, it's easy to do, but it's important not to do it. And
which is half of the problem that you have when you're getting mainstream newspapers reporting. They often miss the point of the subtle nuances of it going up and down.
Yeah, somebody talks about a slowdown, and then in 2 paragraphs later, it's become a major recession. You know, I mean, slower growth isn't always a bad thing. You know, still growth, which I guess is kind of what we've seen. And employment. I mean, employment is actually quite a good measure of confidence. I mean, we asked directly about confidence, but we also asked about employment prospects. And employment among the respondents at least has been edging up over the last year. Each of the last 4 quarters has had not a massive growth, but a small growth. And then we asked people, what do you expect for the next quarter? And we're still getting positive balances there. Now, it's not to say 1 or 2 people aren't saying there will be cutting employment, but overall, there's more people saying it'll be up than down. And that to me is an indicator that although people may be a little bit uncertain, they're not seeing a disaster.
They've still got orders to fulfil, they've still got work that needs to be done.
And perhaps more importantly, they've still got skill shortages. I mean, that's another factor which is again coming out of this survey. Okay, it's not a majority of respondents, although possibly if we just looked at manufacturers it might be. You know, it's still it's in a minority, but it's still a significant minority who are saying that skill shortages are holding back their level of activity. You know, they don't see the impending Brexit problems as solving that problem, if you like, by taking away the need. So there's still this problem still exists that we're still dealing with. And I think the other important thing is that traditionally, one of the questions we ask is, what's causing a lack of orders for members? And we've been running this survey in different formats for a long time. And traditionally, everyone would always tick any economic situation, and then you looked at what else it ticked. Well, over the last 2 or 3 surveys, the economic situation it's still there, but it's fallen massively. It's at really low levels. And we've got that question going back 30 years, nearly more than 30 years, and it's never been at that sort of level. And it's things like customers' lack of confidence, which are the most important factors behind a lack of orders. And that really, again, points to this confidence problem. But it also suggests that the underlying economy is actually okay. And that's not what people are worried about anymore, which is very unusual, but doesn't seem to be the problem. So overall, our surveys are saying, yes, things aren't as good as they were, but we don't think the world's coming to an end. But we all need a bit of certainty over where Brexit's going, and I guess watch the headlines and read between them, of course, over the next few months, and let's hope we get to a sensible and outcome that everyone can at least benefit to some extent from.
So the kind of message from this is we need more clarity, but it's not the end of the world.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it would be hard to have less clarity at the moment, but that's the message. It's don't panic rather than we're doomed, I think, is to use a Dad's Army quote, if that's okay.
It's more than okay, Jeff. It's more than okay. Well, thank you for joining me today, and that's a really great look over this. We'll be continuing to do these podcasts over the coming months, and no doubt Jeff will be back in joining us. But thank you very much for listening, and if you've got any feedback, please just drop me an email at tom.lane@mta.org.uk, and we'll get back to you. But we'll be returning soon with another MTA podcast. Thanks for listening.